One thing I've learnt is that a contract is not worth the paper it's written on if it's flimsy. If you get challenged, if you have to pull out the contract and go into a court of law and it's a flimsy contract where you haven't covered all the bases, you've lost before you've started. It's really, really important that your contracts cover every eventuality that you can think of. With most contracts, they are documents that generally don't get looked at, in my experience, generally don't get looked at on a day-to-day basis. So the very first contract that I signed was a partnership agreement with my very first business partner. It was a very comprehensive agreement. What would happen if she wanted to sell her shares? What would happen if I wanted to sell my shares? Were we allowed to sell it to anybody? Did we have to offer it to the other shareholder first? Whose job was it to do this? Whose job was it to do that? What were the expectations of both parties? And we had an agreement that was ethic. Unfortunately for me, my partner decided to marry me and she now owns the whole business and I think I work for her. But that's another story. The next time I got involved in a contract, and this is when I really realized the importance of the contract, was when I sold one of my businesses. And the contract was a flimsy agreement. At the time, I never thought of it. It was a very simple contract. I thought, let's keep this straight and simple for both parties. Everybody was gung-ho. The buyer was happy. I was the seller. I was happy. And I never thought, well, what if anything goes wrong? And it did go wrong. And this was an agreement, a sale agreement of a business in 2001. It's now 2013, and I'm in the process of taking legal action against people involved with that contract on the sale of that agreement, where they have breached the agreement by using certain intellectual property that belongs to me. But the agreement wasn't so cut and dry where it was that specific. When I read it, it looks very cut and dry and black and white to me. But when an attorney reads it, they can give you 101 ways how to poke a hole in that. And that's when I really made sure that every other agreement that I did thereafter, I really invested money in, and some of them have been very, very costly, but they're watertight. In franchising, every franchisee signs a franchise agreement. If you have a franchisee that breaches that agreement, it affects the entire brand, all the other franchisees and the franchisor. You have to be able to pull them in line, and you have to be able to do it quickly and easily, and that all comes down to your franchise agreement. It has to cover every eventuality. In our case, right down to the type of music you can play in your restaurant, to how to deal with customer complaints, to where you'll buy your supplies from, who you can buy them from, what happens if you can't get from that supplier, what are your options, and that's just to name a few. One of the biggest contracts that most of us go into is when we get married. By law, we have to sign a marriage contract, and it's quite strange because what is a marriage contract? It's a contract that decides what's going to happen when you get divorced, and you sign this before you get married. And it's daunting because you go into this, you're all in love, you're ready to get married, you're so excited, you love each other to bits, and now you sit down with the lawyers, his and hers, and you have to say, well, what happens if this doesn't work out? Partnership agreements. All my partnership agreements have been really, really extensive partnership agreements. And like I mentioned earlier, there's a good reason for that. What happens if one partner wants to leave? There's come-along clauses, there's go-along clauses, there's take-along clauses. There's a whole bunch of things that have to be addressed. And it's important you get it right. You don't want to be in a situation, in a relationship, in a business where you can't exit the business because the agreement has not been drawn up nicely, and you'll end up in a situation where you leave the company, you're going to lose more than what you feel your shares are worth. So I labour the point a fair bit, and I have done it with other friends of mine and people that have come to me for mentoring advice, is get your agreements in order, spend the money on your agreement, most agreements you never look at until the time comes that you need to exit or there's a problem. And when you pull it out the drawer, you're going to thank your lucky stars that the agreement is solid and watertight, because that's when you're going to need it. And when you need an agreement, it's generally when the wheels are coming off or something like that. Not generally, but often the case when things have turned sour. And now you have to resort to legality, and that's when you have to pull it out the drawer. Be it a divorce, be it a franchisee who's not towing the line, be it a partnership that's dissolving. So you want to make sure that that piece of paper you pull out the drawer is worth something. You don't want to be like I am 11 years later, litigating, spending a fortune of money, trying to ensure that what was meant at the time and agreed by both parties becomes the reality, and not 11 years later is vague and people are saying it's not what it was. Spend a little bit more money so you don't have to spend a lot of money later.